In the long term, pornography seems to create sexual dysfunctions, especially the inability to achieve erection or orgasm with a real life partner. Marital quality and commitment to one's romantic partner also appear to compromise. To try to explain these effects, some scientists have drawn parallels between porn consumption and substance abuse. The brain is wired to respond to sexual stimulation with surges of dopamine. This neurotransmitter, most often associated with reward anticipation, also acts to program memories and information into the brain. This adaptation means that when the body requires something like food or sex, the brain remembers where to return to experience the same pleasure. Porn scenes, like addictive substances, are hyperstimulating triggers that lead to unnaturally high levels of dopamine secretion. This can damage the dopamine reward system and leave it unresponsive to natural sources of pleasure. This is why users begin to experience difficulty in achieving arousal with a physical partner. The desensitization of our reward circuitry sets the standard for sexual dysfunctions to develop, but the repercussions don't end there. Studies show that changes in the transmission of dopamine can facilitate depression and anxiety. In agreement with this observation, porn consumers report greater depressive symptoms, lower quality of life, and poorer mental health compared to those who don't watch porn. The other compelling finding in this study is that compulsive porn consumers find themselves wanting and needing more porn. Even though they don't necessarily like it, this disconnect between wanting and liking is a hallmark feature of reward circuitry. Following a similar line of inquiry, researchers at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, Germany, found that higher pulse use correlated with less brain activation in response to conventional pornographic imagery. This explains why users tend to graduate to more extreme and unconventional forms of porn. Pornhub analytics reveal that conventional sex is decreasingly interesting to users and is being replaced by themes like incest and violence. Early childhood exposure to pornography has created an over-sexualized culture from childhood. The average age a child discovers porn is 11 years old, when the brain isn't even developed enough to understand what the child is seeing. The attack of the enemy is on the psyche, the mind, will, and emotions of man. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his only soul? Demons affect your mind, will, and emotions, and they want to take out your soul. They want your soul to be lost. As mentioned in my last video, the predators are the brood of vipers. Sexual predators are not only the ones that physically try to touch women without or men without consent, but they're the ones that try to violate spiritually. When a man lusts after a woman, they've committed adultery in their heart. They have now sexually violated this woman without her consent. This is spiritual rape, and visualization is a type of witchcraft. When it's consistently done, you are casting a spell on that particular person, as there's now an attachment being formed, a soul tie without their knowledge. The uncleanness in your heart then begins to affect the woman or man and draw the person into sexual sin. Everything that is said now becomes manipulative, and you then intend to seduce this person into sexual immorality. This is a huge tactic of the enemy of both males and females, and they are both guilty of this. But in Proverbs 5, as mentioned before, it talks about the immoral woman with mouths dripping with honey, but there's also immoral men too. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life has become the world's motto. Do not partake of it. In 1 Timothy 1, verse 5, it says, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters with all purity. Saints, we should not be looking at each other in any lustful way. We should be looking at each other in all purity. If we find ourselves lusting, we have unclean hearts. You need to submit to God and the devil will flee. The issue isn't what she's wearing. The issue is you and your unclean heart. Stop blaming women for your perversions. Of course, you're going to struggle with lust if you're addicted to porn, if you're watching porn, if you're constantly lusting after women, if you're constantly trying to look for a way to get her into bed. It doesn't matter what a woman wears. If you're lustful, you're lustful. Whether she's wearing less clothes or she's wearing more clothes. You cannot control what you see. You can decide to take it in and it turn into sin, or you can decide to reject it, to take that thought captive. The porn culture has caused young girls to be more perverted, to be accepted by men. Mothers and fathers, you need to teach your sons and daughters what true biblical womanhood and manhood is. Do not allow it to be defined by the world. Teach them about sexuality before the school system does. If you don't, they are putting your children into the web of Jezebel. In Judges chapter 19, verse 22, it says, as they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring out the man who came to your house, that we may know him carnally. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly, seeing this man has come into my house. Do not commit this outrage. Look, here is my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Let me bring them out now, humble them and do what with them as you please. But to this man, do not do such a vile thing. But the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And when the day began to break, they let her go. Then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was, till it was light. When her master arose in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, there was her concubine, fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, get up and let us be going. But there was no answer. So the man lifted her onto the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. When he entered his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, and divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from that day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. This story is a horrible, horrible, horrible story. And it speaks of the rape culture that has been introduced in our society. The issue is not men in itself. The issue is what's controlling them. The issue is what's entered them. And it's usually from childhood. This is what's causing the rape culture and the perversion. Due to the highly sexualized culture, this rape culture has been created, where men feel entitled to women's bodies due to the belief that their needs to be satisfied is more important than anyone or anything else. Pornography and incorrect view of women causes you to see them as pieces of meat. You begin to see them as puppets for your own sexual gratification. You see the connection? This is the mind of Jezebel, manipulation and gratification of self. So she gains and manipulates people to be her puppets, just like these immoral men. All rape, spiritual and physical, is violent. Jezebel is violent. The whole movement of sexual assault and men feeling entitled to women's bodies is violent. You just see men just, whenever they go up to a girl, they're touching their bums and they're touching their intimate parts. And I've never seen such things before. And it's just widely accepted. It's widely accepted, especially in the clubs and all of these places. It's accepted. It's just a part of life. But I'm letting you know, guys, from today, that it's not a part of life. It's not normal. It's evil and it's wicked. And it's violent. In one of my last videos, I spoke about productivity and how we are called to the productiveness that God has called us to be in. We're called to be productive. Adam was placed in the garden to produce by himself. And then when Eve came along, he produced in her and alongside her. Sometimes we can confuse sexual desire with the desire to be spiritually productive. What has God called you to do? And are you doing it? Are you investing in your art form? And notice how I say producing in her and with her, because there's this belief system in the church and outside where people think that the woman is lower than the man, which is completely incorrect and wrong. The woman works alongside the man. No one is greater than the other. No one is greater than the other. Just because the man is the head does not mean he's greater than the wife. Not at all. He's not greater. It's just the purpose that he holds is different. The purpose that the woman holds is different. And no pun intended, she literally holds his purpose. The woman holds the purpose of the man. She extends the purpose of the man. How can you expect to bring a woman into your life if you don't even know your purpose? She's an extension of your purpose. So if you don't know your purpose, you need to seek God and say, Lord, what is my purpose? What am I meant to be doing? Sex and sexual desire is a gift from God. It is a holy thing. It is an act of worship unto the Lord within the bounds of marriage. It is not a nasty thing. It is not a perverted thing. It was created holy. In Hebrews 13 verse 4, it says, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Sex is a selfless act where two people become one flesh. It's an expression of love between husband and wife. It's a demonstration of Christ being one with the church and us abiding in him and him abiding in us. Growing up in church personally, sex was always a taboo subject in church, and we were always taught to run away and not talk about it. But in doing so, we've given the world the permission to define what sex is. And if you're not teaching the saints or even your children about what godly sex is, the world will redefine it. Many people are uncomfortable talking about it because sex and perversion has automatically been lumped together in the same context. Sex is only perverted when it's done outside of God's standard and boundary, which is covenantal marriage. And that can be seen through, it's perverted whether it's through pornography or masturbation, or sex while unmarried, or sex with other people's husbands or wives, or lusting after other women, or sex with someone else while you're married, or even mutual porn watching. That's still immoral. There's no limit to perversion. Perversion has no gender or direct preference. It's a spirit. Maybe at first it will have a preference, but the spirit leads you deeper and deeper into sin, and it does not care who you prey on. It will start off with lust after women, then men, then children, then animals. There's no limit to perversion. Scripture in Judges, these men were perverted. They were full of perversion. It didn't matter if it was man, if it was woman, it doesn't matter. And you see a lot of people that get engaged with perversion and pornography. That in this age, there's so much bisexuality, so much confusion and gender fluidity in this age, because people have given themselves over, or rather God has given them over to a debased mind, given themselves over to their sexual perversions and desires. So there's no limit. Now I'm going to talk about someone called Ted Bundy, or his full name, Theodore Robert Bundy, was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, and murdered numerous young women and girls during the 1970s and possibly earlier. After more than a decade of denials, he confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. Even he explains the dangers of pornography and the effect it had on him, and how it contributed hugely to him committing these heinous crimes. I'm going to show you a video of Ted Bundy explaining the danger of pornography and where it led to.
I grew up in a wonderful home with 2 dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. Basically, I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum. I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, you know, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, you just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent, very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret, very close to myself, and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror for my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy. And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I say pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it. Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography. Those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And We grew up in regular families, and pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. He snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in the society that tolerates.
Okay, so what you got to realize is that masturbation opens up portals. I'm going to discuss this again further as we get further down the list of the things I'm talking about. In Genesis 38 verse 1, it says, "It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he married her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son. And he called his name She conceived again and bore a son. And she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son and called his name Shelah. He was at Shezib, and she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Onan, "Go to your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass, when he went into his brother's wife, that he admitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also.